Okay, so the YouTube, the LinkedIn is not going to work because we're
Okay.
not. It's just stopped me from going live. So I'm
Okay.
going to take that off, and then we'll try that again. All right, once more.
Okay.
Oh, we're live.
Hello. My name is Jerome Page. Thank you for joining us. While we're waiting for other folks to join, let me describe the 1960s project. The broadcast today is our 11th one. It's our 11th live, which is available on Facebook and on YouTube. We've been sharing what's on the minds of those who were high school during the years 1960 to 1969. Except for last week, we had some special guests who were in elementary school in the 1960s, and they shared their thoughts about growing up with their siblings. They were my three younger sisters, three youngest Page sisters. We had the four oldest of us on, and there was some interest in hearing from the other three. So we had them join us last week on the live. And you can look at reruns of the live on our YouTube channel. Over the course of this 11 weeks, we've been recalling, remembering, and reflecting. I want to thank everybody who's been watching. We also encourage you to read the blogs. We have blogs posted on the website. And if you read the blogs, you also have an opportunity to comment on them. So watching, reading, and commenting are ways in which people have been participating in the 1960s project. Our theme for the project is Tiny Thoughts and Large Memories. An example of a tiny thought would be what you remember happening in a class, say in a science class or a physical education class. A large memory might be an event that has shaped your life that you remember, attending a demonstration, the influence of a teacher, a book you read, someone you met. Today's guest was in high school during the latter years of the 1960s. She graduated from high school in 1970, but we'll have more on her in a minute. While we're waiting, I'd like to share some events or what was on our minds 50 years ago in 1970. Several events or issues today were prevalent then. In 1970, war was on our mind. There were the wars in Southeast Asia, and they were getting out of hand. We witnessed or heard about the My Lai massacre. Students at Kent State were killed. The US invaded Cambodia. Troops were being withdrawn. Recently, President-elect announced that John Kerry was going to be an ambassador for climate change. John Kerry also served as Secretary of State. It was in 1970 that he participated in the anti-war demonstration. So he's been an activist, anti-war activist, even though he served in the service. So war was on our minds in the 1970s. The climate change was on our mind as well. This year, we've heard a lot about the hurricanes and the fires. In 1970, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency was formed. Also that year, the mayor of San Francisco, Joseph Alioto, issued the first proclamation for Earth Day. So Earth Day was started in 1970, 50 years ago. War was on our minds. Climate change was on our minds. Voting was on our minds. In 1970, Richard Nixon signed the Voting Rights Amendment Act of 1970. And what that did was lower the voting age to age 18. Why that was significant was many young men and women who were in the armed services, at that time mainly men, were being shipped off to fight wars around the world, but they couldn't vote. So this Voting Rights Act amendment, which lowered the voting age to 18, expanded the number of people who could vote. Black Pride was on our minds. In May of 1970, Essence was launched, which became a premier magazine for Black pride among women in particular, but all of us in general. Also, Black Enterprise was launched in August of 1970. So we had a women's magazine and an economics magazine or business magazine focused on the African American experience. War was on our mind. Climate change was on our mind. Voting was on our mind. Black pride was on our mind, and music was on our mind. In the beginning of 1970, Diana Ross and the Supremes formed their farewell live concert and unveiled their song, "Someday We'll Be Together." It was not long ago, just before the pandemic, that I had an opportunity to catch Diana's show at the Kennedy Center. She still has juice, and she's still glamorous. So the Supremes broke up in 1970, and so did the Beatles. So lots going on, a lot of was on our minds: war, climate change, voting, Black pride, and music. I'd like to now bring on my guests, Anna Breland. Anna Breland, welcome.
Good evening.
How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. How are you, Jerome?
Good, good. You called me Jerome. Do you know me?
I think I do.
Tell folks how we met.
We met when I took a job at the University of Baltimore as Director of Financial Aid. You were the second African American that I met. They made sure that we got to meet one another because there were only a handful of us working at the institution.
That's right. You were Director of Financial Aid, and I had an academic administrative position, which was called Associate Provost. And that was been the highest academic officer at the campus at that time.
Correct.
So we were among few. I guess at that time, I think Irv was then. Was Irv the?
Irv was there.
He was the assistant or associate dean in the College of Liberal Arts.
Yes.
At the University of Baltimore.
Henderson.
Neil was on the faculty. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there were several other Black administrators, particularly on the student services side. There was Jackie, and who else was around at that time? Jackie Lewis.
Reggie.
Oh, Reggie, right. Mm-hmm. Just saw Reggie on Facebook. He's still rocking and rolling.
And flying planes.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay.
And Tom Corey.
That's right, Tom. Mm-hmm. Bringing about a lot of good memories. I was at the University of Baltimore from, let's see, 1990. No, from 19. When was I there?
90. I started in 1990.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from 1990 to 1996. I think I was there in 97. So. You graduated from high school in what year?
1970.
Okay. So you're a little bit younger than I am. I graduated in high school in 1965. And where did you go? Where did you go to high school?
John Adams High School in Queens, New York.
Okay. And I attended Germantown High School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Talking about things that were happening in 1970, Ocala Trice chimed in that she became a mother on 11/11/1970. So
Wow.
another event there for 1970. What were your pre-high school years like in New York?
Growing up, I had a lot of fun. We grew up in the Farragut projects, well, Farragut homes, we call them projects. Everyone knew everyone. You couldn't do anything without your parents finding out because the news would hit your parents before you hit home. So we were always very careful about what we did, who we did it with, but the friendships that I made there, I still have. And I have some friendships that are 60 years old, and I still communicate with some of those friends. I call them family.
Yeah, well, if you've been knowing them for 60 years, I guess they probably moved up the scale from friends to family.
Yes.
What were some, you said you had fun. What were some memorable events about growing up? Anything that might have had a lasting effect on you before you got to high school?
The value of family.
Okay.
And friendships were important. We were very involved in games, handball. We had an officer friendly, just like you did. We were, to this day, I do not walk on grass because we had a big grass patch between the buildings and we were not permitted to walk on those grass lots. So even now, I don't walk on my own grass.
Well, what happens when you want to put your toes in the grass and the dirt?
I'm okay with that. I don't have to do that. Sand in the beach, okay. Feet on the grass, not so much.
You know, I think one of the things that people forget about public housing at that time, that there were a lot of strict rules. And you mentioned one about not walking on the grass. So in public housing, then many units, facilities or groups of residences across the country had to have family background checks. So it was a whole list of controls or screening that went in before you could get into public housing. And in the 1940s, public housing had the nickname of being for those who lived there, was the aristocracy of the poor, because you needed income in order to live in public housing there. So the nature of public housing has changed. And my family, when we moved to Philadelphia, we first lived in the Richard Hallen homes in North Philadelphia before we moved out. Well, what was high school like for you?
High school was interesting because I went to junior high even after we moved to Queens when I was 13 from Brooklyn. I still was able to attend my middle school in Brooklyn, which was predominantly white. They bused us, well, I took the subway actually, and it took me maybe about an hour and a half to get to junior high. It was integrated. I had one of the worst teachers ever. I still remember her. There were 2 Black students in the class. I was one. My friend Linda was another. And the teacher just enjoyed singling us out. Linda would get very quiet and emotional, sometimes cry. I was very defiant, not mouthy because I knew better, but defiant in a passive aggressive kind of way. And I can remember being in the 7th grade coming back from the closet. And she said I took too long walking back from the wardrobe and made me stand in the corner. I'm in the 7th grade. Are you
There was,
serious?
well, was it, well, let's go back. You said Queens and Brooklyn. What was the demographics of Queens and what was the demographics of Brooklyn?
Brooklyn, even in our neighborhood, was pretty integrated because when I was younger, I had Hispanic friends, I had Italian friends, I had Jewish friends, all living in the same building. The school was pretty integrated as well, but they started busing when I was in 3rd grade. So I was bused then to a predominantly white area. And that was
And
sometimes challenging. That was in Brooklyn also, but it was about
okay,
30 minutes away from where I lived.
okay. And where does the Queens come into the picture?
My parents moved to Queens. I had a relative who moved up from South Carolina, and she bought a duplex, a 2-family home, and she talked to my mom. They were close in age, almost like sisters. My mother was the baby of 12. So she had nieces and nephews who were close to her age. And my cousin called and she said she was buying this home and asked us if we wanted to move out there with her. That's how we ended up in Queens.
Okay, so you left public housing and moved to Queens.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then, so when you were in Queens, you went to high school in Brooklyn?
I went to junior high school in
High
Brooklyn. I finished junior high school rather, in Brooklyn. I mean, in Brooklyn. I finished it.
Okay.
And then I went to high school in Queens. I was in my last year of junior high, so they didn't make me move.
Okay, so what was high school like in Queens? What was the curriculum like? What was social life like? Did you participate in extracurricular activities?
I did music. I was on the choir. I enjoyed that. I was also a cheerleader
All right.
for a while. I really enjoyed that. I am a kind of outgoing introvert, if that makes any sense. I enjoy being around.
It doesn't make any sense, but
I enjoy
explain
being
that.
around people, but I'm not one to actively seek relationships, if that makes sense. The COVID-19 event didn't really start to bother me because it meant that I had to stay home, but I was perfectly fine doing that.
Okay. So what were your extrovert activities in high school and what did you retreat to when you were in your introvert mode?
I would retreat to reading, sometimes writing. Most of my activities were in school were cheerleading. I enjoyed that because it gave me an opportunity to be around people and go to the games and have the fun of the after party of the games if we won and the tears if we lost. So I enjoyed that. The cousin that we lived with was very outgoing. And so she was the one who convinced my parents to let her daughter, who is a day older than I am, and my sister, who is a year younger than I am, to go out to clubs. We were in clubs when we were 16, maybe 14.
Okay. You
And
mentioned you mentioned a sister. Do you have any other siblings?
I have a brother who's 11 years older than I am, who sometimes thought he was the dad.
Did you obey him?
No, that
All
didn't
right.
always go so well.
You were mentioning being in the clubs in 16. Do you remember any acts that you saw or any performances you saw when you were 16, 17, 18 years old?
I saw James Brown. I saw the Temptations. Where else did I go? I went to the Temptation show rather than go to my high school prom. So a group of us went and we saw the Temptations at the Copa. That was big for us back then.
Okay. Yeah.
That's
So
me.
that's you hanging out at the clubs. You look like a clubber.
You have jokes, Jerome.
You look like a clubber. So there
Oh,
you go.
goodness.
So yeah, but that's you. I say when I see that picture, I see your daughter more than I see you, but it shows. I think you stuck her picture in there instead of yours.
I should have sent you one of her.
That I would have known the difference because at that age, kind of look all the same. Well,
One of the things
what
I
about?
remember, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the things I remember too was you mentioned voting in your intro. And I remember how excited I was to cast my very first vote as an 18-year-old. That was a big moment for me because we weren't a very political family per se. We'd have some of those conversations around the dinner table. I had family members who were very involved in the civil rights movement. One cousin who was on the staff at SNCC, she would come home from college and share her stories with us. So we did talk about politics, but people in my immediate family were not very involved in the political scene per se. No political action clubs or anything like that.
Right. So you say you felt very proud. Do you remember that day at all? Some people some people know when the sun was shining. And what was the weather like when you voted when you were 18 years old?
The weather was great, as a matter of fact. The sun was shining when I voted. I went to a school and I cast my very first vote.
Okay. I take it did you cast a vote this time?
I have voted every year since.
Okay.
I don't even miss the primaries.
And since you're in Pennsylvania, how many times did you vote this time?
How many times? My votes were not cast out. I only voted once. In fact, I worked the poll, so I voted at the poll to make sure my vote was counted.
Okay. What was the curriculum like in high school? What kind of classes did you take?
I took the regular education classes. I skipped physics, which was probably to my detriment. So I took trig, which I hated. Algebra, I hated. So it was the general liberal arts. We did have different categories in high school. We had a business curriculum. We had an academic track, which was the Regents track. That was more for students who were college bound. And we had a business track. So I was on the academic track.
And did you any courses that you mentioned the ones you didn't take? There was ones that were the courses that you enjoyed?
English and Spanish.
Okay. Were you able to keep your language skills up?
No, not really.
Yeah.
I still remember some things, but no.
Yeah, we do. We have a question here from Linda Edwards. She wants to know, did voting at 18 motivate you to become more politically aware?
It did, actually. I wasn't involved per se, but I was aware. I remember having one conversation with my father and mother about, this was after I had taken a Black history class, and we were talking about how Black people were disadvantaged. The smaller businesses were disadvantaged because they had to pay more for their goods, which meant we had to pay more for our goods. And I didn't understand that because that was not, until that time, because that wasn't something that we necessarily talked about. And I never thought about it that way. You would always hear people say, well, you know, you have to pay more if you go to a Black store, or the quality may not be quite as good, or what, things like that. But in retrospect, when you think about why some of those things were happening, that did make a difference to me.
When you were in the academic track, when you were in high school, did you have aspirations to go to college? Yes,
that was a given. I wanted to attend also, but that was a given.
Well, what constituted the given?
My parents. There was no if or are you. It was, where are you going? Not whether or not.
Were your parents, were they college graduates?
No, both of them graduated from high school. My dad was a truck driver. My mother worked in alterations at Abraham and Strauss, and she also did some domestic work.
Okay. Well, my mother-in-law was a seamstress for most of her. She sewed in the factories in Philadelphia for most of her career in the workforce. Your mother was an alteration expert. So
Yes.
that's cool. Yeah. So you went to college? What college did you go to? What college did you attend?
City College of New York. It was part of the City University system.
And why did you choose City College?
I
CUNY, as we
chose,
call it.
right, CCNY City. I chose that because it was free. I also chose that because I had little guidance in terms of how to apply for financial aid and scholarships. And I learned about one opportunity that I may have had to attend school in Hofstra. They had an EOP program that my aunt had told me about. So I went to my school counselor. We called them guidance counselors back then. I went to my guidance counselor, Miss O'Leary. I'll never forget her. And I talked to her about this particular program. I seem to remember the negatives though.
Well, one of the things that has come out of this project is how people remember and what people remember. Yes, people have all sorts of approaches to engaging the past. But as long as you remember, that's a good thing.
But I talked to her about this particular program, and she said, well, you probably wouldn't qualify for it, so we won't bother to have you make that application. And what I ended up doing, because I always had a tendency to be self-reliant, was that I took the financial aid paperwork home and attempted to complete it myself, much to my frustration. And by the time I did get some of the paperwork done, I just finally said, you know what, City College is free. That's where I'm going. So that's where I went.
All right. And you entered City College in 1970 as well, the year you
Yes,
graduated?
yes, I did.
And how long were you at City College? You were there for the 4 years, or?
I graduated in 76 because in 73, in the summer of 73, I took a job for the summer working with the Office of Education. It was the Office of Education then, prior to it moving to the Department of Education centralizing. So I took a job there and I said, oh, this is really good. You know, I can make money, full-time job for the summer. They converted to a full-time job after, so I switched from day school to evening school. I did approach my mother at one time and I said, maybe I'll just take a break from college and work. You know, this money is pretty good. I can get my own apartment. And she looked at me and I remember her words. She was standing in the kitchen. She said, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard you say. So I said, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll just finish school at night. And that's what I did.
And I remember your mother as being a slight woman, so I could hear that powerful voice coming out of a slight body,
Mm-hmm.
calling you out to get you
Called
in
me
the
out.
right. Yes, yes. What kind of classes did you take in college? What was the curriculum? What was your major?
Political science was my major.
Okay, did you
I
start out as a political science major, or did you
No,
end as a political science major?
I
Where
ended
did you
up,
start out at?
but I started out thinking I wanted to be a physician. And then I said, no, I don't want to do that because I took a chemistry class. That was not my strength. And then I said, well, maybe I'll do architecture because I had a cousin who was an architect. I enjoyed drawing and realized that math was a part of that equation and that would not work for me. So, and that's where I go back to high school, because when I was in high school, had I taken the physics or the chemistry, I would have had a better background. I had absolutely no background. When I went to CCNY, the lecture class probably had 200 or 300 people in it. So I had no real grounding or any way to really get the assistance that I might have needed to help me get through the classes. So I ended up with a political science degree. Not
And
sadly.
well, you were resident. You didn't. City University didn't have any dorms, so at that time, I guess they still don't have dorms.
They may now. They've built up quite a bit, but I haven't been up there in a very, very long time. I probably wouldn't even know it. But no, it was a commute. It took me an hour and a half to get to school. So those 8 o'clock classes were torture.
Okay.
And the way that we had to register was, as you know, very much unlike the way you register now. We had to get on long lines, long lines. And
Yes,
hopefully
yes.
by the time you got to the counter where you could get your classes, they were still open. That was another issue. A lot of the classes that I wanted to take, by the time I got to the counter to register for them, were closed.
Mm-hmm. When you were thinking about college in high school, did you ever think about attending a residential college?
I did, but we didn't have the money for me to do it. I didn't figure out how to do it on my own to apply for the financial aid or scholarship. So I just stayed home.
What do you think your greatest social skills you developed when you were in college?
Playing
So
bid whist? No.
playing bid whist. What did you? What type of? How proficient were you at playing bid whist?
Very proficient. Yes, yes. I did do an African dance. We set up an African dance group, so I did that in school as well. And I ran across actually one of my friends who was in the dance group with me on Facebook. So we communicate every now and then too.
Okay. I never learned how to play bid whist. We grew up playing pinochle.
I never learned how to play pinochle. I always wanted to learn.
And after you got a certain age, it was one of those things. If you didn't learn it while you were a certain age, well, for me, you didn't learn it. So that was just a number of things I didn't learn as a kid. I didn't learn how to play tennis. I didn't learn how to play golf. So those things I never developed the desire, the aptitude for as I got into my mature years. Do you still play bid whist?
No, I haven't played in a while, but I did play spades with my daughter and a couple of friends, and they thought that they could beat me because all I talked about was bid whist. And I kind of cleaned them up a little bit, but I didn't brag about it. I just enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You mentioned tennis. One of the things about tennis, because I had an interest in doing that, you had to have a permit to play tennis where I lived in Queens. They had a tennis court, but you had to get a permit to play. So I think that was one of the things that kind of limited access for a lot of us growing up.
Yeah, I don't remember people playing tennis. I mean, it was around and I knew, but I don't think it was an active activity among what I would consider my immediate circle. Some of the guys played basketball, things like that, but I never participated in team sports in junior high and high school. I don't know why. I was thinking about that the other day. So I can't even go hang out on the basketball court and wish for younger days because I didn't have any. But so Lewis wants to know who issued the permit and why.
It was a parks permit to play tennis. So I guess it was the city or the county.
Right. Well, in DC, some of the parks, in order to use it, you have to reserve them for picnics. So I guess it's probably similar to a reservation type system. You just got a permit in order to do it. So now you took this job in the Department of Education, and you, as a summer job, it went on to become a full-time job, and you said you worked and went to school at night and you graduated in 1976. Tell us how your career unfolded. So you started as a summer intern, and describe the development of your career since then?
Actually, it was through that summer job because I worked in the financial aid area. We had 2 program officers. My job was I was a clerk, typist, federal position, clerk typist. And at that time, the schools used to apply, they still apply, but they would have readers of applications for financial aid. And there were financial aid directors who would come in who would read the applications for aid from all of the schools in that particular region. We were in region 2. So that was New Jersey, New York, Puerto Rico. I think we went up to Maine from Jersey. So the East, and Maryland also. So the financial aid directors would come in, they would read the applications, and then decisions would be made. Well, as time went on, I developed relationships with some of these folks, and they knew that I was in school. And when a job came up, I was offered the opportunity to interview for a position. While I was working there, one of the benefits was the regional directors, officers traveled a lot. And when calls would come into the office, the financial aid folks would want someone to answer their questions. So what I did was familiarize myself with what the regulations were. And I had enough background knowledge then so that when I was tapped for a position on a campus, I was ready.
And what was the first campus you joined?
State University of New York at Farmingdale, in Farmingdale, New York.
Okay, did you have to move up there? Or did
Well, no, I lived in Queens, and it was about 45 minutes away. So
okay.
that's
I guess
how.
all those schools seem far to me, because when I had to visit them during my career as an accreditation, a member of accreditation team, we traveled from DC. So those New York schools always seem to be far for some reason. So.
Well, we had downstate and upstate, so that was one of the downstate schools. Now, if you talk about Buffalo and Oneonta and Purchase, and those were Plattsburgh, rather, those were more upstate.
And how long were you at Farmington?
4 years.
And from Farmington, you went to where?
From Farmingdale, I went to
Farmingdale. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I went to Polytechnic University, which is now Polytechnic NYU. And I worked there for 4 years.
Was that a public or private school?
Private engineering school. And across the street was New York City Technical College, which was a community college and public. They had a tragic incident where someone came into the financial aid office disgruntled and killed several people who were in the building. It was directly across the street from me. So what I did was ask them if they needed assistance in processing applications, because, needless to say, some of the officers were hurt, some of the financial aid people were hurt. A student was actually killed, and one other died later from her injuries. But that's when I started working. I volunteered there. They had a director's position open, and I applied for the director's position, and I got that position. So I moved from a public state university to a private university 4 years later to a public community college as a director.
And then next?
Next, I moved to the University of Baltimore.
Okay.
And
you were there. You were there for how long?
8 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's where for those who tuned in later, that's where we met, at the University of Baltimore. You were the director of financial aid, and in the financial aid's office was in the student affairs division. And I was the associate provost. In the provost on the campus is considered to be the chief academic officer, or there are a lot of different vice presidents on the campus: financial affairs, student affairs, the development. But the academic vice president is often referred to as the provost, meaning that person was the first among all vice presidents, to give the sense that the the campus was being driven by the academic units, and I was the associate provost for while I was there. And for 1 year, I was the campus provost. Sometimes I forget about that. I was I was actually a boss for a while.
That's why you won that award, remember?
You keep mentioning that an award, and then I tell the stories. I have a lot of non-memories so we're going to have to hold this conversation about this award I got when I was the acting provost for the campus of the University of Baltimore. It wasn't that it was eventful or uneventful. It was just not there in my memory now. So
I understand.
we'll have a conversation afterwards. After the University of Baltimore, where did you go next? What was your next career move?
I spent a year at Goucher University in Towson, which was closer to home. I remember having meetings on that campus.
Home at that time, meaning York, Pennsylvania.
It saved me about 30 minutes, 20 minutes driving time. And I took a position there. I remember attending meetings on that campus and remembering how beautiful it was. And saying, oh, I'd really like to work here one day, not knowing that I would actually end up working there.
And from Goucher to what's next? What was
York
next?
City. I became a school counselor at William Penn Senior High School in York, 3 minutes from home. And I would wonder why I was so exhausted when I would get home 3 minutes away. And I thought about it one day and I realized that my drive time was my wind down time because my daughter was young. And so when I would get off from work 3 minutes away, I was on and on. There was no off. And so the time I spent driving gave me an opportunity to wind down from Baltimore, my job there, and gear up for my job at home.
Well, so what did you eventually find a substitute for the drive time, or you just was on all the time?
I was just on all the time.
Okay, you didn't like drive around the block 4 or 5 times to be late.
Once I rationalized it, I felt better about it because I actually thought that there was something physically wrong with me, that I was so tired. But once I figured out
why were you so tired? Was
driving? Oh, because it was so close, and because I didn't get a chance to.
The work was tiring, or what made you tired?
Because I didn't have that down time to come down from work. When I was driving, I could turn my radio on, listen to some nice music, or listen to an audio book and get home and be ready mentally to do Tiana's homework or take her to a basketball game or whatever I had to do with her. When I did not have that wind down time, it meant that I went straight from work and school to mommy I need, or mommy I want, or you know what kids do.
Yeah. You mentioned in the earlier part of the interview, and you also mentioned in your blog, which I encourage people to read, that one of the challenges you had in high school was your encounter with the financial aid counselor or the guidance counselor. And that became something that was ingrained in your memory. And then you become a guidance counselor. Later, many years later, you become a guidance counselor. What was it like to be the guidance counselor, given your experience, your negative experience with guidance counselors?
I hoped to do a better job. My goal as a school counselor was to empower students to do the things that they needed to do for themselves. It was, even on the college level, when I would work with the students who were coming into college, they knew so little about their family's finances. And I realized that culturally, that was something that a lot of people didn't discuss with their children. But there was so much information that they needed to have that they had no clue about. which is what made me then want to move from the college level to the high school level, so that I could make sure when the high school students graduated and went to college, they were ready and informed.
Well, here's a question from Linda. When you think about your career, what inspired you the most?
Helping students to be more self-sufficient, more knowledgeable, get the education, particularly at the high school that I worked in. It was predominantly Black.
And this is the high school in York?
Right, William Penn, where I retired from. A lot of the students that I worked with had never left York, never. They would grow up here, they would die here. So one of the things that I wanted to do was try to expose them to some other experiences that they could have. I guess in the back of my mind, I was thinking too, I didn't go away to school. Maybe I can get some of these students to have a college residential experience and live vicariously through them.
Since you didn't go, they got to go.
Right. And a lot of it was they felt the same way that I did. I can't afford it, but they could afford it if they knew what to do, what resources were available. So that was my goal.
And do you consider yourself more successful as being a guidance counselor or a financial aid counselor at the high school level?
A school counselor, I do. I see many of my students now who have graduated and are physicians, or some of them have even gone into school counseling themselves, engineers. It warms my heart to see what they've done.
Okay. Well, I think that is quite remarkable when you look back and see these little knuckleheads now being accomplished professionals. It is a very rewarding sense of well-being and contribution that you've made. So you said you were quote unquote retired. Why did you put that in
quotes, air quotes?
In air quotes.
Because I am as busy now, if not busier, than I was. Some of the things that I'm doing now, I was doing while I was working full time. I don't know how, but I am doing as much now as I was when I was spending more time now than I did when I was working.
When did you retire? What year? You mentioned it before. What year did you retire?
I think it's 4 years ago now, maybe in 2016. Okay. 2016.
And how long did you stay retired?
Not long. When I woke up the next week, I thought it would be very leisurely. I could get up, have a cup of coffee, watch the news, read a book, sit in the yard. I've never been much of a gardener, so that didn't faze me. But I found myself waking up and saying, okay, 6 o'clock in the morning, what am I going to do now? So I walked around the house, picked up a little bit, and then I said, oh, let me call my sister who works at a daycare center. And I knew they were a little short-staffed. And I said, well, maybe I'll go in and I'll help her a little bit with the children. So I did that for a few weeks, and I got tired of the little people. And I said, okay, well, let me see what else I can do. So I really then became more committed to some of the community service, my community service aspects.
Well, here's a financial aid question for you. Okay, you had to put your financial aid hat on. And this is from Susie. How would you suggest students avoid college debt considering the high cost of education today?
My recommendation, and I would tell my students the same thing, go to community college first. Get all of your general education credits at a lower cost. Apply for every scholarship that you possibly can and start looking for those scholarships as a sophomore. Participate in community service, network, broaden your network. You never know who's watching you and who might open a door for you. Do the community college, transfer to a 4-year college, and get your degree that way. try to avoid loans, though it's very difficult to avoid them.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a lot of good advice. We may have to edit this and just put it out there on the Facebook for people to hear. Yeah, so that's very good advice. Do you have any favorite activities now that you're retired? Or groups that you work with? Any of the special groups among your activities, or are there any that stand out?
I have two community service organizations that I'm very passionate about. One of them is the Crispus Attucks Charter School. Crispus Attucks Charter School is for those students who could not make it in the high school for whatever reason. It could have been a life reason, whatever. But they offer students 17 and above the opportunity to complete their high school diploma in 18 months. And they also walk out with some type of a skill. They have child development courses that students can take, welding. A lot of the students are helping to rehab homes as part of their academic program. So I'm very passionate about that one. And also the Cornerstone Youth Home is a project that I just started working with. And this particular project is trying to help students stay in their home school if they're in a homeless situation. So as small as York City is, if a student moves across the street, that student may have to change schools. And for elementary students, that could be pretty traumatic. We only have one high school in York City, so that's not too bad. You don't have to worry about that. But the elementary schools and the middle schools, it could mean you moving in the middle of the year. Some of our students move more than once, and it wreaks havoc on their academics. They move because they're homeless. They move because their parents aren't stable. So this particular program will allow students to remain at the home that we're going to open for the duration of their school year, or however long it takes for their parents to get together. They would stay with us from Sunday to Thursday. They would go home with their parents on Friday. The parents would bring them back on Sunday. We'd have a family meal, and then we start over. It's not a permanent placement, but it does give the family an opportunity, particularly the youth, to gather themselves. While we're doing this, we're also providing the families with the tools that they would need to stand on their feet and hopefully get into a more stable position.
Is the home open now?
We plan to have a ribbon cutting in January, and we will take in 8 boys from kindergarten from age 7 up to 13.
If somebody wants to make a financial contribution to that effort, how can they do that?
They can make their contribution to Cornerstone Youth Home, CYHYork.org.
Okay, I'll make sure I post that along with the video. Well, out of 50 years, right? Looking back, what lessons would you like to share?
Enjoy the journey. Try to maintain your relationships with your friends. They're important even as you age. Take advantage of whatever opportunities may come your way. I was a little timid, so there may have been some things that I could have done that I did not do because I was a little timid. So just be your best self. Try to find out who yourself is, first of all, and then be your best self.
When I find myself, I'll let you know.
I'm still searching as well.
When you look forward, you're quote unquote unretired or retired. What do you see as the future for Anna?
Actually, I have a helping gift. And I call it a gift because Not that I'm bragging about it being a gift, but I always see myself in a position of serving. I serve at my church, I serve in my community, and I serve my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta.
Okay. I don't know what the verbal sound for Delta Sigma Theta is. Do you want to give a shout out to your sorors?
Hi, sorors. How are you? I may have one or two. That's another thing I didn't do. I didn't pledge until that's it. I didn't pledge until I was an adult. I pledged the graduate chapter. So that you asked about regrets. That's one of the things that I'm sure I missed, not having a residential experience.
Thank you, Anna, for joining us on this Facebook Live. This is our 11th Facebook Live. I enjoyed hearing about your journey. I encourage people to read your blog. You can also comment on it. If you want to see the replay, it'll be posted on Facebook as well as on YouTube. If you'd like to participate, to be a guest, either a guest blogger or a guest to be interviewed, we're going to be called it a video blog in addition to a written blog. Please email us. We'd be more than happy to entertain your thoughts. And again, Anna, thank you for sharing your tiny thoughts and your large memories. And good night.
Thank you for the invitation. Good night.